Hello and welcome to Broadcast Focus. My name is Russell Trafford-Jones, and on the channel here we talk to people throughout the industry about relevant, important and interesting topics. On this show I'm delighted to be joined by Barbara Lange, who advises the industry on environmental matters. Welcome to the show, Barbara.
Hey, Russell, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you with us. And what I wanted to do is really dip into environmental and sustainable topics. You have your own company called Kaibo 121. How would you describe your work?
So I launched it at the beginning of 2022 already. Hard to believe, time flies. To really establish myself to guide media tech on their path to sustainability. That's kind of my little tagline there. And so it really depends on what the clients are interested in. But it's really to help them understand the concepts of sustainability in media and really understand how they can deliver on that and often sustainability comes around in the form of efficiency gains and cost savings, but of course also the classic ESG initiatives and things like that. So it does vary, but overall helping the media tech sector understand how they can operate more sustainably.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned ESG because that seems, you hear that a lot, and I know the S is about sustainability. So I think it's probably worth,
Actually, it's not.
well, let's find out more then.
So ESG is environmental, social, and governance issues. And really, ESG is the lingo that's used mostly by the investment community. So you'll see publicly listed companies having ESG statements, and they really talk to environmental concerns, social issues like DEI, accessibility, those are all social issues, and governance, meaning transparent governance and making sure that there's equitable board structures and all sorts of things around governance that are important. All of that is under the umbrella of ESG, whereas sustainability is all of those things are under the auspice of sustainability. Oftentimes we think sustainability is only about the E part, the environmental part, but actually sustainability means that you care about your workforce, that you give back to your communities, that you have transparent governance. And sustainability is the easiest way to think about it is the intersection of economic, environmental, and social issues. So they kind of get used interchangeably. And if you're a real nerd about it, you would not do that. But for our intents and purposes, it's fine to say ESG and sustainability kind of the same.
You can tell I'm not a real nerd. I didn't even get the S right. So
It's okay.
so it's interesting. I mean, so what you're saying is that the sustainability can be taken in its widest form, right? So if you're working people like 12 hours a day, 17 hours a day, whatever it is, then clearly that's not sustainable. Everybody would agree on that. But it is legitimate to say it's not a sustainable business in all sorts of different ways. And so environmental sustainability is probably the best way to phrase the kind of what used to be called the green part of it.
I suppose, yeah, yeah. I think that's a good way to think about it. Also, I would direct people to the UN's SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN, we've all heard about the COP meetings, right? And as a part of that, and a part of meeting the Paris agreements, the UN has established 17 SDGs, and it's interesting to look at them because there's actually only a handful that talk directly to climate and environmental, the E side of things. There are a dozen of them that talk to the social side of things. So sustainability is definitely something that covers more than just environmental concerns. But for our purposes, yes, I would say
Yeah.
environmental sustainability would be more appropriate.
Okay, cool. So I remember I went to a Simply meeting at BT Tower. I don't know when it was, but it was probably about 5 years ago. And we had this link up with some folks over in the US. And part, if not all, I can't remember, of the meeting was about being more environmentally sustainable in what we do. And the question came up in the room, about about why it is that certain broadcasters and vendors were focusing on this, and then we put that question over the wire to the US, and genuinely the answer just came back: we're not thinking about that. There is no impetus. And it was really weird because sometimes you get a diplomatic version of the answer, but there just wasn't anything there. And so that was interesting. It became not as much of a surprise, but I don't think anybody had thought that that would be the case. And is that something that kind of resonates with you, given that you're based in the US and no doubt work across North America?
I would say that thankfully, that you would probably get a different response now. Um, but it's not nearly here in the US, it's not nearly advanced in the broadcast sector or the media sector as it is in Europe in general. The rule of thumb or the guidance that I follow say that the Europeans, and I put UK into that bucket, is probably 5 years ahead of what's happening here in the US. The drivers are different. In Europe, and in UK, there are mandates and regulations that have forced, if that's the right word, all industries to comply to various sustainability metrics. Whereas here in the US, that's just not the case. The drivers in the US are mostly through ESG investing, the investor community. So publicly listed companies are definitely establishing ESG targets and net zero, goals, but that the drivers are very, very different. I think the other thing that you see here in the U.S. that's different, perhaps, is that the consumer products, whether it's a car, a vehicle, an EV, or products that you purchase for, your dishwasher liquid, the consumers are getting presented with more sustainability messages, and that has a trickle down effect. But definitely, the regulatory space is not quite here. Although, having said that, the state of California has recently passed legislation that is very similar to the CSRD regulations in Europe. So, as California develops that, most businesses will probably comply. And California being a very big media
Yep.
state, then I would foresee that in the next few years that will dramatically shift as well. So,
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I think we've seen, and it's been mentioned at the Devoncroft summits last couple of times that I remember going, that the when it comes to getting project work, whether it's from a broadcaster providing it to another broadcaster or vendors replying to an RFP, that although you have to write down what, whether you are sustainable or not in some way or other, the actual marking that goes into working out whether you've won or not, um, hasn't traditionally been, highly focused on sustainability, if at all. So I wonder, do you have any visibility of whether that's changing?
I think it's evolutionary and is slowly changing. And I think because our industry is quite global, if you're a vendor or a provider and you want to work in the UK, for example, that UK production company or outfit is going to demand that you comply to certain sustainability metrics. And so suddenly that little, I won't say little, that small to medium sized company here in the US is going to have to figure that out, because if they want to do the business, they have to figure that out. And it's for sure RFPs are beginning, and in many parts of the world require that sustainability metrics, and not just self-assessment, but actually third-party certified data points, so that I think that's another driver that will help us accelerate this movement. I just saw a statistic that said that the media sector, media telco, I mean, it's a pretty big, conglomeration of other sectors, is only 21% in terms of being actively engaged in reporting on their sustainability metrics, quite different than other industries. And so we have a long way to go to improve. And I think things like supply chain management, RFPs, even regulation, all help.
Yeah. So, and I imagine that broadcasters taking a strong stance, like the BBC's net zero promise, and Sky has another very similar one. I don't know whether it's officially net zero or another term, but they've got to now start building that into their the whole of what they do, including their vendors. So I guess that forces the issue really for everybody.
Yeah.
Only with a few broadcasters up front, depending on how quickly others are able to adopt similar stances.
Yeah, and in this case, I think the UK is actually quite advanced, and all the broadcasters in the UK are requiring that productions be Albert certified, for example. And so Albert certification requires that the production follows green measures and thereby receives the Albert certification. So the Albert certification comes out of BAFTA. And so that's another driver. So if you want to have your production on Sky, BBC, ITV, any of those broadcasters, you have to make sure that you're following these criteria. Again, a wonderful way to push and incent productions to follow those guidelines. The challenge we have is that Albert and other such certifications will certify the production. They don't go all the way through the process to certify the full workflow all the way to distribution. So we still have some work to do in the industry to make sure that we're covering off the part after the production is wrapped and what happens, because that piece of content still lives somewhere, and that somewhere is taking up energy. So yeah, we still have some work to do, and there are groups that are beginning to look at that. Greening of streaming is one that looks at the distribution end, but all of these are very important and good incentives, I think, to keep the industry moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and is there being from BAFTA? I mean, Albert, even just by the name, it feels like it's a pretty British specific certification. There's something about the name Albert, I don't know, seems British to me. But is there, in the US, is there something similar that perhaps it's not as popular talked about? I don't know, but what's the groundswell there?
Yeah, so there is. So Albert is very well, it's born in the UK, but it is being adopted across the world, mostly in Europe, I would say, though. I just learned, though, that there's a movement in Europe to have Europe, so now not the UK, where there's movement to develop a carbon calculator that's a little more precise than Albert even is. But nevertheless, Albert is pretty much failing other things as a standard. In the US, there is is a group called the Sustainable Production Alliance, which is a network of all of the major studios in Hollywood who've come together, and they've been together for a number of years, and they curate what's called the Green Production Guide. And the Green Production Guide, very similar to Albert, but more U.S. centric.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, the real difference between these two is one uses pounds and miles and gallons and things like that, whereas the other one is more metric oriented. So the fundamentals are very similar, but how
Yeah.
they measure is a little bit different. So
Okay.
I would advocate using any one of them,
Yeah.
actually.
You can't go much wrong. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's good. And so yeah, you mentioned the greening of streaming. So I think that's been around for quite a while now, and continues to help. And I remember going to a talk, both where we heard both about Albert and greening of streaming. It was a few years ago, and the feeling in the room was we've got to start somewhere, and we're effectively
Hmm.
nowhere. So we've got to. So first, we're going to learn how to measure, and then we'll learn how to improve, and then we'll really go for gold. Do you feel like we've had enough time that we're stepping beyond just this is how to measure? You mentioned a calculator, which we're thinking of. Europe's thinking of making. Well, we'll make a better calculator. It's like, well, that's great. Are we at that really early stage where we're just still trying to understand the problem? Um, it's difficult.
Yeah, I would say I spend a lot of time educating. I think we are actually even there's a core group of people who certainly understand the concepts and understand that there's a lack of um, standardized data that we can all rely on. There have been plenty of case studies done, often in the lab, not in real life. And so, one of the efforts that Greening of Streaming is working on is actually measuring energy consumption across a variety of content types and user devices, so that we can understand in the field what the true energy costs are. Um, and so, but there's many people who don't understand the concepts at all, and so I do spend quite a bit of time through training exercises and education. And I think once the industry is more aware and understanding, then they can begin to make better choices.
Mhm.
If you don't know the difference, I liken it to when you used to go to or today you go to a Starbucks coffee shop and you see the calorie counts. Now,
Okay.
we know that a cup of coffee has almost 0 calories, but the Frappuccino has over 1,000 calories. So now you have a decision to make, and you have a better way of making the decisions. And we have to do the same thing in our industry: is help people understand the choices they make. So you can have the Frappuccino, but you might need to make other adjustments to offset that, and do it wisely. And until we can educate the industry on what those concepts are, and they'll just continue doing the same. And all the while, we still need to generate research and data points so that we can all be speaking from the same language, and referring to the same figures. So
Mhm.
yeah, we're still early days in this as a topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, but I mean, it's not to say that nobody's doing anything. There are strides
No.
being done, so that's fine. I'm not trying to take away from anyone's actual actions, but taken on mass, I guess. It feels to me that there are definitely companies talking about this, but there are definitely companies who aren't. So if
Yeah.
you were to take the aggregate of all of the broadcasters and then all of the vendors in Europe, um, I don't know how much actual action you would find. So, and you mentioned education, and earlier you mentioned that you've embarked upon a, a, creating another, is it body, an organization?
A joint
to
venture, I guess,
joint venture. Let's
is a
go with that one.
joint venture. It's yeah, joint
Partly to
venture.
educate.
It's designed to educate and really to help elevate the topic and get people to understand these choices to make. And so, my good friend Lisa Collins, some of you may know her from her time at the IABM. She and I left our respective other entities at the same time and came together and decided that this is an interesting thing to do. So, just today, we made some pretty big announcements of some things that we're going to be doing at NAB, but including training. So, yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's the MTSS website. There's a load of information in there. The Knowledge Hub, we're doing monthly webinars. Under the events at NAB, we've got a few major activities, including 4 hours of fundamental training, Sustainability in Media 101. All of our content is free because we think it's important to share. The Media Hub there, that Media Tech Hub, is a repository of sustainable products in the industry. So if you're looking for something, that's where you could go. We are embarking on a brand new venture called Sustainable Exhibitor. So we, working with NAB, we all will score exhibitors based on their sustainable efforts. And yeah, the training is listed there on the right, and the left item on the bottom there is a webinar that we'll be producing right before NAB. All of what we do is really centered around advancing, sustainability in the media sector. So yeah, we are,
It's pretty good.
giving the materials away, and we do look for sponsors to help support us. But yeah, that's a great effort, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, and I think first of all, it's really important to have these. It's really important to talk regularly about the topics because, as you say, we've got to get that knowledge out there. And I think with the thinking about diversity within the industry, whilst there's plenty to do, I feel like the people are talking about it and aware of it a lot more than before. And so, as you say, people are then starting to think, well, should we do something, or are we doing the right thing, and having that conversation. Whereas, it sounds like perhaps all of that is still to come in terms of environmental sustainability. So the weekly webinars are great, and the other events that you do. And I imagine it's quite special because, for obvious reasons, they're not in-person events. But at NAB, it will be an in-person event. Is that the first one, or?
We are in talks with IBC. We're also in talks with SET in Brazil. And our thinking is we're not going to create a new event. That would be silly. But where there is already an event, sustainability doesn't mean you never meet people. It doesn't mean you never travel. It means you do things just with a little bit more prescribed mindset. You're mindful about your decision making, and mindfulness means you're caring about what your carbon footprint is. But you still have to travel. You still have to meet people, and so. But we are committed to doing events at existing events and not
Exactly, yeah.
creating a whole new one. We will be doing our second annual conference virtually on June 25th, and we are looking for speakers who are interested in telling their stories. So people can reach out, and we're very excited about being able to elevate and inspire through case studies of what other people have already done. So I guess my other thing that I'd want to say is, this is a journey. One of the lingo that we hear a lot about is are you on your sustainability journey? And a journey is, it's a multitude of steps, and you just have to start. And you don't have to be perfect the first year. You just have to start, and you'll be surprised to see how things evolve and develop. And you look for efficiencies and things like that. And by the end, you're very far along, further along than you think you are. So.
I think that's a very, very fair point. Very good point. Thank you for that. Well, we'll draw a close there. Thank you very much, Barbara, for joining me today. On the channel, we're very close to the beginning of our journey, so do subscribe to make sure that the numbers go up, and to support Barbara. Okay, so it's been fantastic. Thank you again, Barbara, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thank you, Russell.